How do you make a decades-old NES classic relevant for the modern era without losing any of what made it a classic in the first place? Well, you update the visuals, audio, controls, tweak the gameplay, quality of life updates, expand the story, stick a 0 in the title, and most important of all, give those 8-bit sprites a sexy anime facelift. And yeah, that may seem like a lot, but hey, it worked for Metroid, and it most certainly worked for Blaster Master. And what's really awesome is that's not even including all of the bonus content that they added in to really up the replayability, though we'll get to that later. Released in 2017 by Inti Creates and the original creators, Sunsoft, for basically all modern consoles, Blaster Master Zero is the reboot that we never knew we needed, and the redemption arc the series deserved. Fondly remembered as that NES game with the jumping tank, Blaster Master, and by extension Blaster Master Zero, is just so much more. Combining side-scrolling exploration with Metroid-style upgrades and top-down shooter action. And just like the original NES Metroid, Blaster Master is kind of hard to go back to. While very ambitious for its time, the classic Master Blaster is just really rough around the edges. NES hard, limited continues, no saves, it's just not for everyone, and probably won't appeal to those who didn't grow up in that era of gaming. And while still a gem, once you tasted that sweet remake, there's just no going back. So jumping right in, you are immediately hit with the game's first major change, the story, which is no longer regulated to the instruction manual. And while many of you retro fans may have preferred that, and yes, you can just skip it and blast straight off into the action, you shouldn't, as it sets up some of the new gameplay additions, builds up the world for sequels, and makes for great motivation at the end. Seriously, it has been a while since a game has made me just go hell no to the bad ending, and immediately have to hunt down what I needed for the good one. But keeping it short and sweet, the story has been changed a lot. But the absurdity of how the original story began is still intact, with our main protagonist, Jason, hopping into a mysterious and freaking epic tank that he just finds, traverses mutant-infested terrains, all just to find his lost frog, Fred. I'm not making this up.
Are you in there?
Which ultimately leads to teaming up with an anime cutie to save the universe.
Because video games.
And all told through sexy 8-bit anime cutscenes. Definitely my kind of upgrade. But it's not just that. Old school fans may recognize this opening scene. It's almost identical. In a great call, Blaster Master Zero retains that classic 8-bit aesthetic with similar scaling, only now opting for more colors, details, and finer sprite work, since obviously the limitations of the NES have been lifted. The 9 overworlds, and yes, I said 9 overworlds, all you retro enthusiasts, look unique, colorful, and diverse, each with their own little gimmick for traversing them. Of course, we've got all the usual suspects like water and ice stages, but there are also some less seen areas, like an industrial area with locking mechanisms. And these areas are pretty big, loaded with enemies, twists, and turns. They'll definitely take a while to explore. Luckily for you though, you have got the best tank in all of gaming, the Sophia Mark III. And it is not your average tank. I mean, this thing can jump higher than Mario, and can fly, and shoot missiles, and lasers, and lightning, and you know what? It can do a lot of things as you power it up. In fact, it doesn't even control like a tank. Leon Kennedy controls more like a tank than this does. The Sophia actually controls more like a platforming character, similar to, say, Mega Man, which is improved upon heavily in this remake thanks to no longer being limited to a 2-button controller. Seriously, it's amazing just how much of a difference that alone can make. Plus, all the other little things that we take for granted, like the shoulder buttons letting you easily switch between power-ups, the analog stick simplifying shooting at an angle. Plus, the controls are just tighter in general. Most of the hits you take are gonna be your own faults. Except for when trying to grab onto these stupid ladders. Oh, they're so cheap. Get back in the tank, Jason. The overworlds act as battle platforming stages, akin to what we know as Metroidvanias today. You travel around taking out enemies, searching for boss rooms and power-ups, all to help you progress, often requiring a special power-up to reach the next area. And once there, you're free to return to it whenever you please to pick up anything that you might have missed. And why wouldn't you want to explore more when everything just looks and sounds amazing? I think a great reviewer said it best.
Seems like Sunsoft games always have good music.
And Blaster Master was no exception, and Zero isn't either. It updates all the classic tracks for the modern era, but it still retains that retro edge. Every track is just radiating energy, while still embodying the themes of each area. An optimistic adventure in the forest, the dankness of the underground, and the impending dread of the disaster yet to come. The entire game just feels like how I remember an NES game looking and sounding, as opposed to, how they actually were. But they still keep themselves grounded, keeping every area looking simple and clean, so you can focus on the combat and exploration, with the exception of the underwater area, where they did try to go beyond that 8-bit style, and it ends up looking really busy and out of place. In-game proof that sometimes simple really is better. But fortunately, even that isn't much of an issue thanks to some wonderful quality of life improvements. Like a map. Talk about a lifesaver, though they don't just give it to you, you gotta find it. And as I said, the side-scrolling exploration segments are only half the story. When you exit your tank, it's usually to explore mini dungeons where a majority of the bosses and treasure lie, and these segments are completely different. The dungeons actually play like a top-down shooter, if they took place in a Zelda game. Hidden paths to explore, consumables to grab, enemies to stomp, and walls to bomb are all par for the course as you navigate through each area's gimmicks, such as sliding around on ice, which you can melt with your flamethrower, so that's cool. The water stage has you getting washed away, there are conveyor belts, rising lava pools. Every zone offers something fresh to keep things interesting as you explore. But it was here especially that the game's 8-bit roots really crept in. And this can be kind of hard to see without actually playing it yourself. But every dungeon feels like you're moving on a grid. Now, it's not very stiff, but movement just doesn't feel as free as you'd expect from a more modern game with this kind of layout, or even something like a classic beat 'em up where you can move around the screen quickly. It just feels old. Not bad, just old. Luckily, enemies are also bound to this as well, struggling to move at angles, so it is easy to wipe them out. And wipe them out you will. Because aside from jumping, Jason is freaking OP. Until he gets hit. And unlike some other infamous NES games, the Sophia and Jason actually have separate health bars. But they don't exactly work the same way, though yeah, they still do exactly what you'd expect. Run out and kaboom! And while yes, Jason will die if it hits zero, it goes one step further. With every hit he takes, his weapon diminishes. And unlike the Sophia, where you have to actually find all the new weapons, Jason starts completely decked out. And his peak weapons are busted, making early segments of the game way too easy, even the bosses. It's really only if you're careless and take one too many hits, getting stuck with your weakest gun, that things can get a little rough. Assuming, of course, you're playing as Jason. Yes, as I mentioned at the start, Blaster Master Zero has added in a lot of extra content for replayability, beyond just the extended story and extra area. It's also added in new and recognizable characters with completely different playstyles. We've got 2 Inti Create characters, including my boy Gunvolt from Azure Striker Gunvolt. Seriously, if you like the Mega Man Zero games, check that one out. My review's in the corner. And if you're willing to spend just a little bit extra, Shantae and Shovel Knight are also on deck. Though, I didn't try those 2 out myself. But what really needs to be said is that all these characters just don't play differently in the top-down mode where you'd expect, but also in the side-scrolling areas as well. They can all practically forego the tank and pretty much take on every area of the game as if it was a brand new platformer featuring them. A very cool and pretty fresh take on an already great adventure. Worth giving the game one more run after you've beaten it. Though they don't get their own stories as well, which is a bit of a shame as I would have liked to have seen Gunvolt's take on the mutants. And it doesn't stop there. Zero also features a boss rush mode, a co-op mode, yeah, they added co-op to a single player game, double props for that, and for those of you who might still be miffed at the lack of NES Hard, a new challenge mode to sharpen your teeth on. It's got something for everyone. And while sure, its quality of life enhancements does make the game considerably easier, which may piss off the most hardcore of retro fans, it really does make it so much more approachable in the modern era. With great visuals, epic music, multiple playstyles, fresh new takes, so many bonus features, and a simple but engaging story, Blaster Master Zero is everything that a remake or reboot should be. It comes highly recommended.